Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, an interview-style podcast where leaders share insights about their leadership journey and experiences. I'm your host, Craig Bulmer, a people and capability specialist whose purpose is to create opportunities to optimize people's performance. Welcome to Leadership Unlocked. My name is Craig Bulmer, and I'm joined today by John Carroll. Hey, John, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Craig. Thanks so much for having me on.
No, absolute pleasure. I know we've been kind of playing around with each other on LinkedIn. We've got some common connections and so forth. And I was going through my list and going, I need somebody else to come on and even from a slightly different angle. And I think you'll bring that today.
I'll try. Hopefully it's a slightly different angle. Let's see where we go.
Let's see how we go. So, as always in my podcast, I love to give you, my guests, a couple of minutes up front to say, who are you? What do you do? So you get to pitch your business a little bit. So over to you for a few minutes.
Okay. So, my name is John Carroll. I set up a business about 4 or 5 years ago now, which is now branded as Leadership Safari, John Carroll's Leadership Safaris. And what I do in my business has actually got multiple streams to it, but the main themes of my business are that I do keynote speaking and training workshops around the human skills of leadership, very much human-centered leadership. This is what I call the soft skills of leadership. I don't like that term because I think they're the hardest things and they're the things that people struggle with the most in leadership. How to lead people, how to lead a team well. So that's where I focus. But the way I do it is probably very different in that I grew up in Zimbabwe, and we can go into a bit of that story later on, maybe if we get to do that. But I grew up surrounded by animals. I love my wildlife, and I love writing. I love stories. I think stories are one of the best ways to teach and to learn and to grow and develop. And I mean, that's how we've worked as human beings forever, is through story.
Yeah.
So I've written a series of African animal fables that relate. Each fable focuses on a very carefully selected African animal, and each animal and each fable is related to a specific topic of leadership, the human skills of leadership. So there are 5 core territories that I work with on my leadership safari map. And the first one is the philosophy of leadership, my philosophy of leadership, which is the principles of what I call self-led leadership.
Yeah.
And a self-led leader, and this is what I teach, and these principles weave through all of the territories and topics that I'm talking about. So my principles of leadership are that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. Okay. So you need to lead yourself well first. So that's why it's called self-led leadership. But there's a flip side to that. It's 2 sides of the same coin, in that what you need to develop a great team is for your team members to lead themselves well too. Because if they're not leading themselves well, you've got an enormous job to lead them, to manage them, to control them, to guide them, whatever you need to do. But if you can create a team where you know how to lead yourself well, your team members lead and manage themselves well, your job as a leader is so much easier. And so that's the principles that I espouse. Firstly, in the first territory, which is called Main Camp. It's a fable about a lion. So it's a play on MANE, Main Camp. Yeah, The second territory is Self-Awareness Waterhole, which is a fable about a rhinoceros, a belligerent rhinoceros who tries to dominate everything and everyone. And that's about leading yourself well so you can lead others better.
Yeah.
Practices for doing that. The third territory is called Teamwork Territory, which is a fable about meerkats, and meerkats are known to be fantastic teamwork animals. They're incredible. So they're built into that fable about how to build a great high-functioning team. The fourth territory is Culture Canyon, and that's a fable about an elephant. I love African elephants. They're probably my favorite animal, but they have such incredible cultures within their herds and how they operate together. And that territory, the topic of that territory is developing employee engagement and a great corporate culture, what I call an engaged culture. And then the fifth core territory is Change River Ravine. And Change River Ravine is a fable about a leopard and how a leopard got its spots and had to change and adapt and be flexible. And that's about leading a team for ongoing change. This is not change management. It's not the processes of change management. It's leading to build ongoing change into your corporate culture, so that it just becomes change, constant change, and continual improvement is the way we do things around here.
Yes. And
So
becoming resilient, right, as well in that space, I imagine.
Sorry?
And becoming resilient in that space.
Absolutely. Resilience is really core to all of that. It is. And if you as a leader can build your team really well with that, the self-led leadership concept of understanding themselves really well, that's what helps to build resilience. Because if you've got a sense of meaning, of purpose, of direction in your life, of what you're doing in your life and how your role fits into your life, how your position fits into your life, how that all feeds together, that's where resilience can start from in a job sense.
Yeah. So this is an interesting space because obviously you've got a lovely all-encompassing feel and theme and so forth. And we will go back to Zimbabwe at some point. But I guess my interesting point is my interesting question right now would be what's your leadership background? Because I'd imagine you've had some frustrations, had some realizations, and went, hang on, this is a way to do it. And then you've packaged it with the leadership safari. So tell us a little bit about your background as a leader.
Okay. So one of the first real, other than school and things like that, one of the first real leadership roles I had was I grew up in Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, and I grew up through 15 years of civil war there. Part of that was, and we can go more into that if we want to down the line, but that's a different thing. But it does talk to resilience and things like that. But part of what happened there was that every white male, because it was pre-independence, it was an apartheid system. Every white male, when they reached the age of 18 and left school, was conscripted into national service. So I ended up in active national service. I did an officer's course, and I ended up as a sergeant in a military unit on active service. Through that, I learned how leadership operates in a military sense.
Sure.
Cut back to post that, I went to university. I did 2 degrees in commerce and psychology. And then I went into the Unilever Group, and I was on a fast track management development thing, spent a while with them, realized that the big corporate area was not for me, jumped out of that, went traveling for 3 years, started my own business overseas in London, went back to Zimbabwe, started my own, jumped out of the brand. I was in brand marketing, by the way. That was my original background. Jumped the fence from there into the advertising industry, worked in the advertising industry and set up my own agency in Zimbabwe with a partner who was the creative side of the agency. And we were lucky enough to develop that business to be we were the 6th largest of 22 accredited agencies in the country after 4 years. And the thing I think, and I only reflected on this later and realized why this had happened. But the thing I'm very proud of with that was that in 7 years in that business, we didn't lose a single staff member. Not a single staff member resigned.
Wow.
I did have to fire a couple, sadly, but no one resigned. So I learned lessons out of that later on when I reflected on it. We then immigrated to Australia in 1998. I ended up in various management roles and then ended up as CEO of a large profit for purpose organization where I was responsible with a co-CEO for merging 12 companies in 4 years, 12 previously independent smaller organizations in a period of 4 years to create Omnicare Alliance. That was a really, really interesting process because the challenges around blending together 12 separate organizations and their staff, getting them under one banner, to understand that we're now under one banner. It's not like you've been operating for years previously as your small little independent organization. Now we're one group. We're under a different name. We're offering a multitude of different services. We had multiple business units. We were across 16 locations spread over 360 odd kilometers of coastline. So it was a mammoth task. And my specific role, I was CEO for brand marketing and people. My co-CEO was the CEO responsible for finance and compliance. And that worked really well. He knew his role and he knew that those were his strengths, and I knew those were his strengths. And I knew my role, I knew those were my strengths, the people and then the brand side of it. And neither of us wanted each other's jobs, so we didn't compete for each other's jobs. But it worked really well. What I learned out of that, and again, what I'm very proud of out of that, was that within 12 months of the final main merger that finally formed Omnicare, within 12 months of that, we had an independent staff satisfaction and engagement survey done, and we achieved global top tier satisfaction and engagement ratings in 3 out of 5 areas.
Wow.
And again, to be honest, I wasn't doing this in any formulaic way. I was just doing what I thought I needed to do. And it was only afterwards, when I started developing a leadership safaris concept, that I tried to nut that out and say, what was it? What worked and what didn't work?
And what were some of the things that worked? Generally, what did you find, like philosophically, I guess, what were the things that worked?
I think the first one and the key one was communication with people and getting people involved. And we made a few mistakes. When I first started doing this, we made a few mistakes in terms of not involving the staff members at all levels enough. And I very, very quickly realized that was absolutely critical. If we wanted people to buy into what we were doing, they needed to feel they had input.
Sure.
If they had input into the process and input into what the ultimate organization was going to look like, they were in.
Right. That's time consuming, though, isn't it?
Time consuming.
That can be time consuming, right?
Very, very. And that was the one thing that we had to work with the board very closely with, was they were always in a rush to get this done. And understandably, because there's a cost attached to it. But they had tasked me with one of the specific things I was tasked with was developing a great corporate culture. Because we were a people services business, we were working in aged care and disability services, non-residential aged care, but very, very people focused. And therefore, we needed our staff to deliver great personal service. My take on that was that if we don't deliver great personal service as the leaders of the company to our staff, they're not going to pass that on to the customers.
Sure.
So we involved them, we talked to them, we got their input. If we weren't going to implement something they suggested, we told them why it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
We gave them that feedback. And then what we did, another key thing to this was we implemented a marketing program that started internally. So we really wanted to get the brand internalized in the organization first.
Nice.
And that was absolutely critical. So we did things like we were trying to get people across eventually 16 different locations to understand what people in other locations who they hadn't even necessarily met at this point. They didn't understand what they did in these different locations because there were 5 different business units. So we started creating little videos within each unit with just little stories and personal stories for staff and clients and things like that, which we shared on our intranet. And then we taught the staff to start doing that themselves. And they started videoing what was happening, and they were sharing that on the internet. And in that way, we built up this camaraderie, we built up this feeling that we're all in this together, we're all working towards the same end purpose.
There's a sense of belonging, right?
We're doing.
There's a sense of belonging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it worked. We ended up with a list of clients that we couldn't cope with. We had too many clients. We had a long waiting list of clients knocking on the door, wanting to come in. And that was simply because our staff were delivering such fantastic service to these people, and we got known for that. We did virtually no formal media marketing at all.
Wow.
Word of mouth spread, and yes, we were on social media and we did do marketing around that, but there was very, very little. And we didn't have to pay for very much marketing and advertising.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this morning. I had an interaction with a retail store yesterday. I won't name them. And the guy was so rude. Like, And I was thinking, why was he so rude? And I thought, my perception is that you're the expert. I'm not. I'm coming in and I'm being vulnerable here. Just help me out, man. But don't treat me like a piece of dirt and go, it's up to you, mate. Like, it's like, why would I want to go back to that store again? And I started to think deeper about that is, why is that staff member like that? Maybe there's his own personal stuff, but what is that organisation doing to say, this is what we're about, this is what we do, this is how we do things around here, and this is why we do things around here? There was no sense of ownership or belonging or a sense of, hey, I can help you, I'm the hero here, let me be a hero for you. It was so adversarial.
Absolutely, and we've all seen that. I've got stories of that as well, and they all feed into, to be honest, into what I've now developed into the speaking and training work I do. One example, I had a similar example when we were still in Zimbabwe, and my wife and I were doing some gardening one Saturday morning, and we needed, I forget what it was now, but we needed some implement that we didn't have, and we phoned up a local hardware supplies place, and they said, oh no, we close at 12 o'clock. It was now about 11:30. So we jumped in the car, raced round there to get this implement, got there at about just after 11:45. The doors were shut and locked. And I went, I've just phoned, and they said they were open. So there was still staff in there. So I knocked on the door, and we were standing outside, and there was a number of people gathered around as well, all wanting to come in. There were about 7 or 8 of us there. The doors were locked. Eventually I got someone to come to the door, and I said, you're supposed to only close at 12 o'clock. It's now 10 to 12. Why are you closed? They no, the manager's made us close. I said, well, can you call the manager? They went and got the manager down, and I'm not an adversarial person, but I was annoyed.
Yes.
Wrong.
Yeah.
The manager came down, and I said to him, you're only supposed to close at 12. He said, yes, but if we don't close at 12:15, we don't get away until 12:15. And my Saturday is important to me.
And retail wonders why they are struggling. Anyway, let's not go down that track. So, what was some of again, broad picture? What were some of the things that didn't work? You mentioned that there were things that you tried and just didn't go to plan. What were some of those things that you can share with us, that you're happy to share with us? I guess it can be a bit vulnerable talking about some of this stuff sometimes, but what were some of those?
Yeah, so I think, as I said initially, going in when we were first doing, my role initially was to merge 7, they were actually Meals on Wheels organizations.
Oh, right.
Everyone's heard of the Meals on Wheels.
Yeah.
So it was 7 of them initially, based in 7 little towns along the mid-north coast of New South Wales. And they had all been run by, they were small teams, run by people who had been in their role for years. Many of them had very little experience in anything else, but they were lovely people, most of them. But they didn't have very much experience in terms of structured organization.
Sure.
They were just doing things flying by the seat of their pants. And you can do that in those tiny little organizations in smaller towns. They could get away with it because there was no competition or anything. As I said, I went in there initially and said, okay, this is what we're doing, and here's how it's going to work, and here's the structure of things, and this is what we're going to do. And I met massive resistance.
Yeah.
Massive resistance. And as I said, I very quickly realized that was the wrong way to do it. I needed to go in there and say, this is the outcome we want. This is where we want to end up. I need you because you're an expert in this area. You've worked in this for years. I haven't. Help me. Let's make this work together. How do we do this so it comes out really well? And ask those sort of questions. And that really fed into my whole leadership principle of that's our job as a leader, is to get the best out of the people working with us. That's our role.
And that's a massive mindset change for many managers, because I think there are a lot of leaders, managers, supervisors go into a role and say, well, I'm the boss now. And even though we're 2024, we still have some fairly archaic boss-like thinking that you will do as I tell you to do and you'll do it how I tell you to do it. So I think it takes a reflective yet special person to go, hang on, I can still get this outcome, but I can get it a different way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it does take some reflection. And hence, in the training and the work that I do, it's about self-awareness first and
Mm.
understanding yourself first and getting to those understandings. Because if you're confident in yourself, you can be more vulnerable with your people and you can be more accepting of their ideas if you've got self-confidence. And
Mm.
I've noticed in all the work I've done, on the consulting work I've done, and things very often, the managers who are most lacking in self-confidence are the ones who are the most dictatorial.
Right. Interesting. So it becomes a facade almost.
Yes. Yes. It's a cover for their own, let's say, insecurities, if I can call
Sure.
it
Yeah.
that. But yes, it's really, really crucial to understand what your role as a leader is. And the interesting thing about that is that once people get that and the light bulb goes off and they understand it and they start implementing that in their workplace, their own job becomes so much easier because they're not trying to dictate and their staff aren't fighting them.
Mm. And I don't know if this is the right word, but less weaker as a leader by doing that. I think sometimes I feel like people think like they've lost control, but you can still have control. You can still have, I guess the word I'm looking for is influence. You can still have a major influence on the outcome and the way you want it to go.
Absolutely. And you must do. You must do. Your role as the leader is to talk about the outcomes you want and to ensure you get them. That's your job because you're tasked, for example, as a CEO or whatever management level you're at, you're tasked, you've probably got ROIs or KPIs or whatever it is targets that you've got to meet. And so you've got to deliver on that. And so you've got to look at the outcomes and say, those are the outcomes we need. Let me work with my team to get those outcomes to be delivered. And if you're not in control of that, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, and people do, and I get that sort of feedback often. And I've worked a lot through Asia as well, and it's interesting how different countries in Asia and the Middle East, Asia and the Middle East have very different perceptions of that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've worked a lot
Very,
up
very
there.
different.
Yeah.
The countries in Asia tend to be, some of the ones I've worked in, certainly Malaysia, Thailand, places like that, tend to be, their managers, let me use the term, softer from that point of
Sure.
view. They're happier to be like that. Once you get into the Middle East, the cultures there are very different. And more dictatorial styles come into play. So you do have to tweak that and understand that as well. But I still believe that you can still be very much in control of your team, very much in control of the outcomes that are being delivered, but you don't have to be totally and utterly dictatorial. It's not a weakness. It's not a weakness to involve your team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a massive mindset for people, a mindset change. So tell us a little bit about this love of the animals and the wildlife. Obviously, you were in Zimbabwe, and I won't go into too much detail on that because I know for many people there can be some pretty harrowing stories that I've heard over my time coming out of there, having to leave everything. And I've been to South Africa once, and I went to a park, but it wasn't a great park, unfortunately. But it's an intriguing layer you've placed over it because you've been able to put your personal love of something over something that you're obviously very passionate about and very good at. So tell us about that connection.
Yeah, I think that's why I wanted to overlay the African animal stuff on it, partly because I love stories and I love storytelling, and to me it's a great way to learn and grow and develop. But I grew up, so where I grew up in Zimbabwe, I was very fortunate because my family were very much into animals and wildlife, and my older brother and I particularly, and my younger brother Simon, there were three of us, three boys in the family. And we really got into our animals, and we grew up with a menagerie around us. And my dad was very accommodating. So he was always, when we were younger, he was always having to build, hutches for things and cages for things. And he ended up at one point, we had this huge, I suppose like an aviary in the backyard. We had a big backyard as you did in those days. And this huge aviary, it was massive. It was probably, well, I'm going to say 15 meters long and about 5 or 6 meters high. And
wow.
I don't know, 7 or 8 meters wide, something like that.
Huge.
To house all the wildlife we had. So we had a lot of birds and things. And we ended up being like, because we were so into our animals, we ended up being like the fauna or the wires of the local area. So if anyone in the neighborhood, a bird fell out its nest and they found it, or they found some injured wildlife on a walk somewhere or whatever, it ended up at our house.
Bring it to the Carrolls. They'll sort it out.
Yeah. So we constantly had fledgling birds that we were rearing. We'd spend half our lives scampering around on the lawn, catching grasshoppers to feed fiscal shrikes and,
What a childhood. That's amazing.
Oh, it was absolutely unbelievable. We had everything from tortoises to monkeys occasionally to chameleons we had a baby antelope at one point.
Wow.
We never had any of the big cats. That's a different story, and that takes very specialist knowledge to rear those sort of creatures. And where we did get things that we weren't confident to rear, we would pass them on to people who could. But one of the main things we had as well was we had a big concrete tank in the bottom of the garden where we kept a snake collection. So we were massively into our snakes. We had a massive collection of snakes. And they were really fascinating. My older brother, Tony, who very sadly was actually killed on active service in the war, but he was particularly into the snakes, and that was his thing. Wow. And we were fortunate because we got made very close connections. At the local museum, there was a world-renowned herpetologist working in there. And he took us under his wing and nurtured us. And we could just walk down into his offices any time, and he would chat to us about what he was doing. It was phenomenal. So I was very, very lucky to have that sort of upbringing.
So where did this connection come? At what point did you go, hey, I've got all this leadership background and I've got this leadership experience, and then I feel like it might be a midlife crisis type moment. I hope I'm not.
It probably was.
But at what point did you go, this can be overlaid and this has a really good way? There's a really good way of getting across this content in a way that's engaging.
Yes. So when we were still in Zimbabwe, and when I was older and running my ad agency and things like that, we spent a lot of time out in the bush and in wildlife parks. It was so easy to do there, and virtually everyone there was interested in wildlife. So we'd go away with groups of us. What I had noticed through that was how animals in many ways mirrored what we as humans, how we as humans operate.
Sure.
There are a lot of commonalities. And I'd noted that. I hadn't done anything with it, but I'd sort of realized that. Well, that's really interesting, how elephants operate in a herd with the matriarch, and how the matriarch helps to nurture the young, and, those sort of things.
Yeah.
And I'd done more research into that because I was just interested in that whole area. And when we moved to Australia, I'd have a look at wildlife documentaries, and I've watched, I think, every single thing David Attenborough has ever produced, that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And I started to realize this, and it hit me when I was, in fact, it hit me before I got my role as CEO at Omnicare. I was national marketing and training manager for an independent group of optometrists. So Eye Care Plus, they've got about 170 independent optometry members around the country, and they're basically a buying group and a management support group.
Yeah.
And I was their national marketing and training manager. And working with them, and I was implementing training for their staff, and started throwing a few stories in around wildlife to get across the point. And then I thought, you know what? I was going to a lot of conferences and things as well. And I realized that at these conferences and in the training we were doing, a lot of it was people standing there and talking at the audience. And I thought, and you could see the audience losing attention. And after a day or 2 days of that, they were bored. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. So, and I'd started writing a novel when we were still in Zimbabwe. So I've always been into writing. I thought, okay, I'm going to write some fables around African animals that I know about, because I've got to write what I know about. And use those as a way to tell these stories. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet.
Sure.
And then I started doing that and developed them into initially just keynote presentations, using those fables and storytelling, and very experiential. So I wanted to make it very different. So when people come in, when my session's about to start in a conference, it's not the usual thing. The lights all go dim. There's a spotlight on the stage. I've got a camp chair that I do some of the presenting from. I've got a fake campfire on the stage. The only PowerPoint I use is a background PowerPoint of the African bush, a night sky. Beautiful. There's often a campfire burning in that if I haven't got the one on the stage, depending on the setup. Through in the background underneath, there's a soundtrack of African bush sounds, night sounds running softly in the background. And I literally just story tell the fable. And then at the end of it, unpack the principles from the fable.
Yeah, nice.
And then from there, I started doing a few speaking gigs, just free ones, doing that at conferences. Then decided to look at it more seriously. We did a speaker training course or program, which was really, really good. And out of that came the Leadership Safaris brand. And I developed it also when COVID hit and all keynote speaking gigs went out the window. I realized I was going to need to do more. And then I developed each of the keynotes that I had, I then unpacked and developed into a half-day workshop as well. So each of them does that, becomes a half-day workshop. And I developed that in 2020, started delivering them online then, and now doing it more face-to-face, which is much more rewarding.
And do you take, I don't like online that much myself, but do you take people to Zimbabwe or to Africa on a safari? Is that like the gold or the platinum way to work with you?
Yeah, so I haven't yet. You're
going to?
I've been waiting for things to settle a bit after COVID, but I am now planning one. Yes.
Awesome.
And it's going to be very much I suppose you'd call it a glamping experience, but very much a Southern African experience. I've already connected with a couple of people who run high-level safari camps over there, who are really interested in doing this. So yes, we're working on that. It's a really exciting project.
That's exciting. I've done some work with the Branson Institute in South Africa. So we've run some entrepreneurial program over there, like a boot camp as well.
Wonderful. Which
was fantastic. And we delivered it in a park, which was amazing. So pretty amazing when you wake up and there's zebra just kind of hanging out just there.
Yeah. What a great experience. So how long was that?
That was a five-day program. We took 3 Aussies over. They'd won a prize to be part of it. And then I think we had about 15 or 16 South African and Zimbabwe and some from Botswana, I think, as well, come on the program. And there was a whole program that we delivered over there, which was, it was amazing. So I'm glad you're doing that. I think that's a wonderful thing that you're going to do.
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah.
Really. So I want to bring in people from all around the world to do this.
Yeah.
Because imagine the melding of minds.
Oh, it'd be amazing.
Do that.
It'd be amazing. If you need somebody to help you carry your bags, I'd love to come and help on that. Tell me,
remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm being somewhat serious about that. Not so much carrying your bags, but if I can offer value somewhere else. Tell me, so if you had a young person who's coming up through the ranks and you thought, these guys have got potential, for use of a word, and you wanted to mentor them, what would be your top 3 tips for this new person coming up to be, for use of a word, as a successful leader?
Yeah. I would say number 1, get to understand yourself really well. Understand what drives you in life, what you're passionate about, what motivates you, and in particular, understand your strengths. I do this for a number of them, and I send them out to do, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Clifton Strengths Test, which is run by Gallup.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that sort of thing. I mean, their one I think is very good. There are others that are similar to that, not personality tests, but natural strengths tests.
Sure.
Get to understand what your strengths are and where you're likely to need support from other people. Those are probably the first 2. Understand yourself, what drives you, what you're passionate about, what gives you meaning to your life. Understand that. Then understand what your strengths in life are.
Yeah.
And then understand what sort of direction you want your life to take that will deliver on that meaning and purpose that you want for yourself, and that will utilize your strengths to help you get there. And then surround yourself with people who are complementary to your strengths, who support you in areas that you're not so strong in. Surround yourself with those people and set off.
Yeah, and I think that's difficult, isn't it? It's trying, as I've got older, I have started to be less trusting of people because I'm not sure of what their intentions are. I think they're good, but often I've been found out, and they're not as good as you think. And I think trying to find those people that do have a similar mindset around values are important, that passion is important, that the outcome is important. It's not about me personally; it's about what we can deliver.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense, and I totally agree with you. You know, I tend to sway towards the trusting people end of it. My wife often says you trust people too much.
Yes,
and she's probably right.
Yeah, me too.
My personal view is I would rather trust people too much within limits than not trust anyone. So, for example, in an organization, when we're recruiting new people, one of the things I always say to new recruits is, you've got this role because we believe in you and because we trust you to do this role really well. And the way I work is I am going to trust you to the nth degree unless you give me reason not to. If you give me reason not to, I will come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll trust you, you trust me, and we'll work really well together.
Yeah, trust is such a foundational element to any business, I think.
Hugely.
Hugely.
And that, I think that's where, you know, if you link that back to what we were talking about with the mindset shift that's required out of that, what I call industrial age management philosophy, which is I'll tell you what to do and you just get on and do it because you're very lucky to have a job here. That's where distrust is built.
Yes.
And so if you start involving people, if you start talking to people, if you start getting people's opinion, if you start taking on board what they're saying, implementing some of their ideas, that's how you build trust.
Yeah, so true. And getting back to them when you say you're going to get back to them, and
absolutely,
yeah, all of that. I totally agree. We've kind of run out of time. I feel like we could talk about all sorts of different things there as well. But to close off, what does John Carroll do for fun? What's his outside of his leadership safaris? I feel like you might have a bunch of snakes in your backyard, but what do you do for fun these days? What keeps you happy and alive?
Oh, we don't have that much. No, I have no snakes. My wife's not keen on that idea. She's not anti-snakes, but she's not in favor of having them around the house. Sure. Sadly. But we do have dogs. We're passionate about our dogs. I'm still very, very passionate about my wildlife. I've developed with a friend of mine. We co-founded an organization, an environmental organization that we run. So I do that in my spare time.
Wow.
I play a bit of golf. I used to play a lot of hockey, but my knee is now history and I can't play hockey anymore. I do a lot of walking and very gentle running because of the knee, but I do a lot of walking. We do a few hikes. I love writing. I write for pleasure. I'm in the middle of finishing off the novel I started when we were in Zimbabwe.
Wonderful.
Actually.
How good.
I've dusted that off. I've published 3 other books in the meantime.
So good.
So writing is probably my main
passion, isn't it? You can tell as you're talking right now, for those that are listening, I'm actually interviewing John on Zoom. So the passion when he talked about writing right now was significantly different to significantly different to golf. But golf is a frustrating sport.
Golf is a very frustrating sport. It's challenging, but it builds resilience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it does. It's enough. So you are on the mid-north coast, am I right? Are you in Port Macquarie or somewhere?
I'm in Port Macquarie.
So have you been involved with the koalas and so forth? Because I know there's quite a lot going on with the koalas and the koala kind of sanctuary up there, isn't there?
Yes. There's the koala hospital up here.
That's right.
It's going through a major expansion project at the moment. They're implementing a breeding program here. So, yes, a bit involved with that, not heavily. I was for a short period of time.
Sure.
But other things took over, and so not particularly. But we're very fortunate because where we live, we're only about 3 minutes walk from 15 kilometers of pristine beach.
Yeah.
But we get koalas in the trees around where we are. So wild koalas because we're part of the koala corridor here.
So good.
Yeah, very, very fortunate.
It's a nice part of the world, actually. It's a lovely part of the world. I spent a lot of my childhood there. Every second year was our Christmas holidays. It was at Port Macquarie. So I have very, very fond memories of Port. It's a great spot.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's grown and developed a lot, but it's a lovely town.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Hey, John, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for your insights. I think there's a lot of gold in there for people, especially around this self-leadership piece. This piece about really honestly looking at your own abilities and your own capabilities and saying, what do I need to do differently to influence my team in a positive way to get the outcomes that you're aiming for?
Absolutely. Those self-leadership workshops or self-awareness workshops, those are the ones that to an extent, I love running the most because I think they're the foundation for everything.
Yeah. So where do we find you? What's the website address? Go for that.
Okay. So it's the website address is leadershipsafaris with an s.com.au, just as it's spelled, leadershipsafaris, plural.com.au. My email address is john@leadershipsafaris.com.au.
And you're on
LinkedIn,
Instagram.
LinkedIn, I don't do a lot on Instagram,
Sure.
but LinkedIn and Facebook mainly.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So if people want to touch base, I highly recommend talking to John. I think what he's done with his product and the way that he's packaged it, whilst it could for some people look like, oh, is that a bit kind of, there's a lot of depth to this and a lot of experience to this. So yeah, highly recommend. So yeah, thanks again, John. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Craig. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.